Hi, I'm Ken with Letus, and we're going to be balancing a C100 on a Helix Junior for this particular video. And one of the things you'll notice here is I've stripped down the C100 a little bit. If you want to use a C100 on with the side handle and the top handle microphone, then you probably should be going ahead and using a standard Helix for that. I've also taken the C100 and I've moved the monitor out so that I can see it, move it out into that position before I go ahead and mount it on the plate here. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'm going to use both screws. Your base plate will come with two screws here. One of them is a 1/4 20, and of course the other one's a 3/8 inch. And I'm going to go ahead and slide those out on the end here. And then I will grab my flathead screwdriver and put them in. And of course you have to do little tricks to this, of course, and so I'm going to do them both pretty much at the same time. So do a little bit on one, a little bit on the other, get them screwed in. So it is kind of nice to have the camera as far back on the base plate as you can, just because it adds a little extra stability here. But I would say for something like this, number one, you want access to the monitor, but it also helps when you put it on to have just a little bit more space in there. So I'm going to go ahead and actually give it just a little bit of room. I'm going to slide the base plate back a little bit, and that'll give me some more room for later. These out of the way. Now, one of the things I noticed too is that I'm not using a standard junior base plate, right? This is actually I'm not actually using the Helix Junior base plate. I'm using the standard base plate here. And you'll want that to be able to put a camera of this size on there, and that is an option. So, of course, as normal, I'm going to take my 2-pin LEMOs and I'm going to put them upside down. And I'm going to go ahead and put this on here. And because we're using the carbon fiber rods, we have to kind of play with a little bit to get them down in there. And I'm going to go ahead and play with this a little bit. Now, one of the things that's nice, when you get a slightly larger camera, it's kind of nice to be able to put it sideways like this. It's just a little tip here. Put it sideways and then move it back and forth. And you'll find, like, say if you had a red or something like that, it becomes even more important the heavier this is. Because you're not trying to fight with it up and down, right? The gravity isn't fighting you when you're adjusting this, and so it actually just becomes a lot easier to try to determine the balance on this. And of course, I want this to be able to stay where it is, and it's falling as if the top is a little bit heavy. So if the top is heavy, of course, I want to move it that way to compensate. And I'm going to actually support this camera just a little bit, support the weight so that it's easier to move these posts. And of course, I moved it just a little bit too far, so I'll support the weight again, move it back the other way. And you can see this is actually pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and just tighten down these blue thumb screws here. You can kind of see these here. And check this out and just test this. Now the nice thing is that I've found that this just happens to balance it, right? With this particular configuration, there really is no need to do a side-to-side balancing on this because it naturally stays in any location I want, right? So now my roll axis is done. I don't need any kind of counterweights or anything like that. So next I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to balance the other two axes, right? You always want to start with the roll axis, and then you work to the pan, the front back, and then the tilt, which is the side handles. And so I'll start here by seeing if it's really easy to move it forward or backwards. And of course, because I have such a large camera, it's quite easy to move this forward. And so I'm going to actually move this back a little bit. Quite a bit here. And see, well, it's about the same difficulty in doing this. So now I'll go to the next step. I'm going to actually take off this left handle. And screw it a fair bit there. take that puppy off, and I'll hold the camera and put it on the non-motorized handle. And then of course I can do this, and if I let go with my hand, this naturally wants to go down. It doesn't want to go up, it wants to go down, which means that I'm front heavy, and so I need to bring the weight back toward me if I'm front heavy. So I'll use my thumb screws here, loosen them up a bit. I will slide it back. And if I put it down like that, it tends to go up a little bit. And so if the lens tends to go up, that means I'm a little bit back heavy. So I'm going to just move it forward a touch. And you'll notice that it works great. We've got these little notches here with numbers, and you can use those to remember where you are. That's especially important. The bigger the camera, the more important that actually becomes in noting those numbers, because the adjustments will become smaller and smaller and smaller for doing this. You're going to want to get this probably within, say, a millimeter or maybe even less. Okay, so I'm actually just a little front heavy now. I moved it back just a little bit. I moved it a little bit too much, so I'm going to move it back. And that stays. Looks like I'm pretty good there. So now I'll go ahead and move this handle down. I'm going to put it at the same height as the other one is. So this one is at 4.8. This one I'll put at 4.8. Now, one of the things that over time that you'll notice here is that the height of these handles actually is dependent on the weight of the payload that you have here. So, for instance, the last camera I had on this was a GH4. Now I have a C100. So most likely, I'm going to need to move my handles up, okay? Because your handles will have a higher placement here with a larger camera. So I'm going to try this out here and see what happens. Now, it looks like it's, we are a little bit top heavy. Now, one of the things about top heavy is, number one, if you let it go, it will end up with the top facing down. But the other way of noticing is, if you point it down forward just a little bit, it wants to go forward. If you point it back, it wants to go backwards, right? So, I am top heavy. And the way I adjust for being top heavy is I raise the handles up. And you'll notice that it moved quite quickly when it shifted. And so I'm going to move my handles up a fair bit, because the faster it rocks back and forth, or the faster it moves like that, the more off balance I am. So this looks pretty good. Now this, you'll notice, looks like it's perfectly balanced. And it might be, but if I move this forward a bit, actually this actually stays. Many times what you'll see is you'll point this down and you'll let go with your thumb and it will rock back and forth. And that is not balanced. That means that you're actually bottom heavy. Okay, but this one actually is staying. Now, one other thing here is, if you tilt it down, occasionally you'll have a problem where the camera will actually pan off to the side. And so we actually have a little solution for that. You can use one of these pins here, and you can stick it down in either the front or the back corner and down into the base plate here. Just screw it in. Doesn't add enough weight to make a difference, but it will keep it from panning one way or another. And it looks like I am actually just a tad bit bottom heavy on this. So I'm actually going to go ahead and lower my handles just a touch, maybe a millimeter, maybe even a touch less. And we'll try this out. And that looks pretty good. So I now have a camera that will stay in any position that I leave it in. And that is a perfectly balanced camera.